Number 1, you are just going to identify these things, the axis of symmetry, vertex, direction of opening, and then vertex form. You do not need to graph it, okay? You just have to find the things. So in order to find the axis of symmetry, you need to know that the axis of symmetry is equal to negative b over 2a. There are going to be things that I say during this review sheet that you have to memorize. That's one of them. Okay, if you don't have it memorized already, then you need to make an effort to do so tonight before the test. Okay, this is A, B, and C. So our axis of symmetry is at negative 7 over 2 times A, which is 7/4. You're going to write x equals 7/4 for axis of symmetry next to where it says axis of symmetry. If there's no x there, it's wrong.
I lied.
Okay, it's because it's an equation of an axis of symmetry. So it has to look like the equation of a line. After you find the axis of symmetry, you know the first part of your vertex is that. So the x-coordinate of your vertex is the axis of symmetry. To find the rest, you're going to take what you got for the axis of symmetry and plug it back into the equation that it came from. Okay, and you're probably going to want to do this on the calculator. So when you type this in, because it's a fraction, you want to be very careful. Every time you substitute, you put it in parentheses. Control divide gets you a fraction. Okay, so every time I'm substituting 7/4 in, I have parentheses. Oh yeah, there's a negative 2 in there. Okay. Alright, so I got 1/8.
I am smart.
If A is positive, it's opening up. If A is negative, it's opening down. A is negative, so this is opening down. Okay, vertex form, that's another thing you have to memorize. Okay, H is representing the x-coordinate of the vertex, K is representing the y-coordinate of the vertex, and then A is the same A that's in the original question. So y equals, A we said was negative 2, this one up here. Parentheses, x minus h, which we said was 7/4. We're going to square that and then add k.
Yes!
Okay.
Did it. We're allowed to use a calculator on this test?
Yes.
Which means I won't do any work for the 4.9 problems?
Yes.
Excellent.
Wait, no.
Okay.
You still have to solve algebraically and show it.
Oh,
Okay, number 2, you are going to graph the parabola, and then you're going to find the zeros, which is going to be your... To start, you're going to identify where the vertex is. Okay, so our vertex is at, whoops, negative 3, 2. So 1, 2, 3, and then up 1, 2. Okay, so this is going to be a parabola. If the parabola opens up, then you're not going to have any x-intercepts because it won't get there. So you wouldn't have any solutions. So it's possible to get no solution. If the parabola opens down, then at some point it's going to run into your x-axis, which means you'll have solutions. So our parabola opens down. So you're going to graph some points. Okay, so when you pick points to graph, you want to pick things that are close to your vertex. So if your vertex is at negative 3, 2, you probably want to pick negative 2 and negative 1 because those are close by. Okay, now you can use your calculator. You're not typing in the 0, you're typing in the right side of the equation. Okay, and you're substituting in values for x. Okay. So as you can see, we get 0. So if I have a point here,
You have a point.
and this is my axis of symmetry because it goes through my vertex, then I have another point over here because it is reflected. So you're going to graph a point and then reflect it.
Could you just take like the slope and go down 2/1?
So because a parabola isn't linear, it's not going to have a constant slope. So that'll work once, but it's not going to work twice.
Okay.
Otherwise, it'll look like a line. So next one, so in case you're unfamiliar with copying and pasting, if you highlight the thing you want to copy and paste and then press enter, it'll copy and paste, and then you can just go in here and change your -2 to a -1. Okay, it gives you another point. So -1, -6, and then we want to reflect it across the axis of symmetry. So you should have a parabola. Okay, and then it wants you to identify your solution. So what is our solution?
It is negative.
-4, 0, -2, 0.
And what exactly are we looking for?
X.
Yeah, you're looking for the x-intercepts. Okay, so you're going to write -4, 0 and -2, 0 for both solutions. Okay. Questions?
Answers. Something.
I see.
Some sort of
You're going to solve by factoring. Before you factor, you want to make sure that everything is on one side and set equal to 0, which it is. Okay, you want to make sure it's in descending order, which it is. And if you can divide by anything, you would want to do so, which you can't. Okay, but those are the things you want to check before you start. So step 1, you're going to multiply A times C, and that gives you 18. Okay, you want to know what factors of 18
3 and 6.
add to 9.
3 and 6. 3 and 6.
So 3,
Let's go with both.
3 and 6,
6
Oh,
and
never mind. 3
3.
and 6.
or
I guess.
6 and 3. It doesn't matter. Okay, so 2x squared plus 6x plus 3x plus 9. Okay, or you can put them in the other order. It doesn't matter.
Yes,
That'd be harder.
Because like you can take up 2x
It's the same.
there.
Okay, we have two groups. The first group, we're going to take out a 2x, and we're left with x plus 3. So that's our greatest common factor. Second group, our greatest common factor is going to be 3, and we're left with x plus 3. How do you know you did it right?
Because
The parentheses should be the same thing.
So yeah, that's number 1. The parentheses should be the same. Also, if you were to distribute this back in, you should get this. If you distribute this back in, you should get this. And if you FOIL these two factors, you should get the original question. Okay, so that's how you know you factored it correctly. Then you take your factors and you set them equal to 0
No way. I actually
and
did.
solve.
Me too.
So you get -3/2
Me too.
Oh, wait, why did I write that?
and -3.
This is the first time I've actually done math properly.
And if you want to check, you have options. Option 1, graph it and see where the zeros are like I just showed you. Option 2, what Annika said, plug it back in and you should get 0 equals 0. Option 3, solve using a different method like quadratic formula. Okay, so there's lots of ways to check for factoring. Okay, now when you get to the completing the square and the quadratic formula ones, sometimes it's a little bit harder to check because you could get imaginary or irrational solutions, and so in those cases you can't really check your work as easily because you can't graph them if they're imaginary. So completing the square. Before you complete the square, you want to make sure that there's no number in front of x squared. If there is, you have to divide each term by that number. So whether those numbers are divisible by that or not, it doesn't matter. So if there's a 7 here, okay, even if 6 can't divide 7, you still have to do it. Okay, because you can't complete the square with a 7 there. You're not going to be able to find the perfect square trinomial. So there's not, so that's good. So the next thing we want to do is get the constants on the other side of the equation away from the x's so that we can complete the square. So take half of b and square it. Make sure you put that on both sides. Okay, because it's an equation. So if you forget to add it to the other side, it's going to be off a little
I
bit.
can't believe I remembered to do it.
It's not that complicated. The equation got equal.
Okay, so the whole point of completing the square is so that we can get a binomial squared. It's to make a perfect square trinomial that factors to two identical factors. So what would this factor to?
X minus 3.
Right, so instead of writing two x minus 3's, we just have one x minus 3 and it's squared. And then over here,
My mango.
we just simplify. Then you're going to square root both sides.
Why do I do this so badly?
My mango.
So you get x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 12. You want to simplify the square root of 12 before you
Oh, it's 2.
do anything else. Okay, so to simplify the square root of 12, you got 2 and then times the square root of 3. Since it's negative 12, I stuck an I in there.
So the I would go in front of it?
It doesn't matter. Apparently Math Excel had it in front, so I don't know. I used to think they put it behind. I'm just trying to stay consistent with Math Excel, but then apparently Math Excel did something different, so I don't care. Just make sure it's not under the radical. And make sure it doesn't look like it's under the radical. Okay, and then you just add 3 and that's it. You can't really simplify that. They're not like terms, so you just leave your answer like that. And because this is imaginary, you're not going to be able to check it by graphing. The only thing you can do is maybe use the quadratic formula, see if it works. I mean, in theory, you could plug this back in for x. That would take quite some time. But you could.
Calculator would bring that quicker.
Calculator doesn't calculate imaginaries.
It's in my shirt.
So no.
Maybe it can.
Can we get like an imaginary calculator?
It's not a thing.
No.
For the quadratic formula, you just want everything on one side. That's pretty much the only qualification. If you can divide or simplify, you might want to do that. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. It's just that you're going to have to simplify extra later. Make sure it's in descending order and it's set equal to 0. Then you have A, B, and C. And A, B, and C are numbers. Okay, so no variables in there. So x equals negative b. So if you don't see a number there, remember the coefficient is 1. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All over 2a. Now, keep in mind the quadratic formula poster is going to be covered up,
Double nuts.
so you need to memorize the quadratic formula if you haven't already. So this is another thing you have to memorize.
Minus 4
Okay.
all over
Christian will start singing the song.
Okay.
Christian, I didn't hear you. Could you sing it
When
again?
you simplify, you want to simplify from the inside out.
Oh yeah, that's right. You did it like Highland. I totally forgot.
So we have 1 minus 24.
Negative 23.
So negative 23. Can we take the square root of negative 23?
Yeah.
23i.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty much it. Leave the 23 in the square root though, because it doesn't square root nicely.
Good.
Ask that you sketch using the vertex, okay? Whether it's going up or down, solid or dotted, and then the appropriate shading. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is, as long as you have the vertex and it's going in the right general direction, and it is shaded in the right direction, and it's the right line, then you're good. So you don't have to graph like 5 points like you did with number 1, you're just sketching. But you do need to know where the vertex is. Okay, so this is vertex form our vertex is 0, -3. So you're going to graph that. This parabola is going up because it's positive, and it's dotted. So you're going to draw a dotted upward parabola, a sketch. So this one's kind of wide. Maybe yours is skinnier. It's just a sketch.
Gains.
Then you're going to shade. Because it says y is greater than, you're shading above or up.
Forward.
Inside.
In this case, it's inside.
Inside.
Okay, then you're going to do the second one the same way. What's our vertex?
It is 0, -2. No, 0, 2.
0, 2. So that's up here.
Somehow saw parentheses.
Boy, hello there.
Is it opening up or down?
Down.
Down because it's negative. Okay. It says y is less than. Do I shade up or down?
Down.
Inside.
Okay, so the answer is technically like everything in here.
The feasible region.
Really solve using the method of your choice. It's solve using the appropriate method that works. And then if there's, a couple others that work, you get to choose which one. But for example, you can't factor everything. Okay? And then as another example, sometimes you have to factor. So like this is one where you have to factor, and you have to factor here too in a certain way. So in order to get all of the solutions, you would have to factor out a greatest common factor to start. So what is the greatest common factor?
I mean, Elijah, Christian ladies, and then there's the whole other Christian Sonia.
Shh. After you take out the greatest common factor, you are left with two factors multiplied together to make 0. So you're going to use the zero product property and set those equal to 0 and solve.
Yay.
Now, the first one, you can divide by 2. Okay, and if x cubed is 0, there's only one thing that when cubed makes 0, and that's 0. Because it's 0 and it's special.
He's a special.
It has no friends.
Now, over here, you're not going to solve it the same way you solved that one. You're going to use the sum of cubes formulas that I gave you before.
Great.
So, again, on your worksheet, your 4.5 worksheet, if you didn't use the sum or difference of cubes formulas, I took points off, like all the points off, because I want you guys to know those formulas. So those are some that you need to memorize.
4 minus 2 from the back of my page.
God.
Oh, why are they laughing? That's horrible.
That would explain just.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that's the sum of cubes. You have to know what cubed is x cubed, and then what cubed is 8.
So x.
2
X.
2 and x. Okay, so those are your a and your b. So you're going to factor this as a plus 2. Okay, and then you got x squared minus 2x plus 4. Okay, so x is your a, and then 2 is your b, which is how I got this and this. Okay, the first little binomial, you're going to take that, you're going to set it equal to 0, and you're going to get one real solution.
Did you just leave the other thingy on?
No. The other thingy you solve either using the quadratic formula or completing the square, because it's going to give you two imaginary solutions. Notice that while I'm doing these questions, I haven't not put equals 0 anywhere. Okay, even when I separated it, I put equals 0 equals 0. I noticed that some of you aren't doing that. Make sure you put equals 0 when you're solving, and you don't just like make the equal sign disappear. I'm going to complete the square because I think it's faster.
How'd you get like x plus 2 and x squared minus 2x plus 4?
That's the
How'd you
difference in cubes.
How'd you get that though?
It's a
That's
difference
the
in cubes. It's a
formula.
formula.
A is x
A,
and B is 2. Because
is A always X and B always 2?
Not necessarily.
no.
Then how do you determine that?
Well,
Okay,
you see
so
how-
if you were listening, I said you have to know what cubed is x cubed and what cubed is 8. X cubed is x cubed and 2 cubed is 8. And that's what makes B2.
Where'd you get the 4?
that was
Oh my
doing
God.
the
B
plus
squared.
B squared.
2 squared is 4.
Alright, guys, take it easy.
Alright, so solving. If you subtract the 4, I can complete the square by taking half of negative 2, which is 1, and then squaring that to get 1. Add that to both sides. Okay, so this would factor to x minus 1 squared. And then I can square root both sides. So I get x minus 1 equals plus or minus I root 3. And that is 1 plus or minus I root 3. These are 2 more answers. If you don't factor the difference or sum of cubes, I'm not giving you any points. Okay. Lots of people are just subtracting 8 and then cube rooting, and I don't know where you learned that, but I didn't teach you that at all. So don't do it, because when you do that, you're not getting all of the answers. No, you definitely didn't learn that in Algebra 1. It's not an Algebra 1 thing.
Now, 2.
It's not a thing.
It's a calculus thing.
It's called cheating.
Cheating's
It's a high school dropout thing.
Called cheating.
Cheater's just a fancy word for winner.
Okay.
Well, Christiana, like, I-
Another way you cheat in math. You add 625 and then you take the 4th root of both sides. That's what a lot of people did. That's not right either. Don't do that.
Can you just square?
This is called a difference of squares. You need to factor to get all the answers. If you don't factor, you're not going to get all the answers. So, in order to factor, you need to know what squared is x to the 4th, and then what squared is 625.
Well, 5.
And then what about here? Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're factoring x squared minus 25 and x squared plus 25. Because negative 25 and 25 make negative 625. Negative 25 plus 25 make 0, which is why we don't have a middle term. Then, because these are squared, you have 2 options to solve. Okay, the easiest option, if done correctly, is to just take each factor at this point and set them equal to 0, and then solve using the square root property. So, for example, add 25 and then square root, and you get plus or minus 5 for x here. And then on the other side, you'd subtract 25.
It'd be the same thing, just I.
Yeah, plus or minus 5i. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. Your other option is to continue factoring, because this is another sum of, or difference of squares. So you could factor this again, and you'd get
4x.
x plus 5 and x minus 5.
Then you get 4 separate answers.
You still have 4 separate
Well, I mean,
answers, they're
yeah.
just clustered together.
Yeah,
But
they're
yeah,
just
I
not
know what you're
close.
saying. They'd be like spaced out.
And it-
Yeah.
and it-
You'd get like negative 5, 5, and then 5i, negative
Negative.
5i.
and it's like, why did I do this?
Questions?
Number 9. Number 13.
The last 2 are the systems of equations. So you're going to solve using substitution, as it says online. All you're doing is you're just taking one equation and substituting it in for y. So you're just setting the 2 equal to each other. It doesn't matter which one you put on which side. But you do want to get everything on one side at some point. And then, depending on the question, if you want to try to factor it, you want x squared to be positive. So I'm going to put everything over here so that x squared is positive. And when I do that, I get this.
Yeah, I got that now. Suck.
So you can either try to factor this as a difference of squares, or you can use the square root property like we just did. Oh no, I'm dying.
I'm dying and I can't get up.
Could you do like x minus 3 and then x plus 3?
After you find your x's, you're going to plug those back in to find the y's. Okay, there's typically one equation that's easier to do that with. So in this example, it's easier to plug them into the second equation. Okay, so when you plug the square root of 3 in, you just get 3 root 3 minus 2. I can't really do anything with that except simplify. So that means I have a point at 3, or at the square root of 3, comma, 3 root 3 minus 2.
We have to put it in order first.
Because it's like you found the intersection point of the line and the parabola. And so you need to know which x goes with which y. Okay, you're also going to plug in that negative square root of 3. Okay, so you get the negative square root of 3 and then negative 3 root 3 minus 2 as your second point.
Could we go?
Yeah,
Because if I put it in decimals, I
So
actually
putting something in decimal form is not simplifying. That is called rounding.
That's called making it happen.
That's called evaluating and rounding, which is bad because that's an approximate answer instead of an exact answer.
Well, would this still be root 3? Because I was gonna do root 3, but then I put it in my calculator to check it, and then
Don't
it
do
just
that.
went to decimals. So I didn't know
It's
if I
fine
was
if
right
you
or
want to
wrong.
check it using the decimals, but it's not fine to leave your answer as the decimal version.
Ah, okay.
Because what you have is an approximate answer. What I have is an exact answer, and they're different.
Okay.
So start this one the same way you started the other one.
Actually, I did this one right, which is somewhat surprising.
I know, right?
There is a way to check on your calculator if the answer is real. I can show you how to do that
Oh,
too.
yeah. You just
So-
flip 2 things and you do intersections.
And,
Right.
and it's it.
Same idea. We want to get everything on one side, and I like to get it on the side where x squared is positive. So I'm going to add negative. I'm going to add the 2x squared. I'm going to add 3x, and I'm going to subtract 1. And it's up to you how you want to solve it, because this one can be solved,
I factored it.
in theory, all 3 ways. I wouldn't complete the square. I'd say that's the worst way. Factoring is probably the best option. Okay, so what multiplies to negative 21 and adds to 4? Yep. So 3x squared minus 3x plus 7x minus 7. To factor by grouping. You can take out a 3x and you're left with x minus 1. And here you take out a positive 7, you're left with x minus 1. So 3x plus 7 and x minus 1 are your 2 factors. Okay, if you set those equal to 0, you should get 1 and negative 7/3.
I did it.
I did that so wrong.
But those are just your x values.
If you use quadratic
Kidding me,
formula,
Shay?
Did you get that answer?
definitely not.
Mr. Rep,
Oh, really?
I got like -1.
I can check it and see like maybe where you messed up. After you find your x's, you want to plug them back in to find your y's. So, yeah, that's right. Negative 26/9, and this is negative 4. And again, you can use your calculator to plug it back in if you want, because I don't expect you to be able to plug that back in and get the answer in a reasonable amount of time. Like, you should be able to do it, but not necessarily quickly.
2609.
If you want to check this question, you can graph both parabolas.
King of being
Okay, so if you want to check it, graph both parabolas and then you find the intersection point. Now the only issue with the intersection point for this question, it'll help you check it, but it's not going to get you the answer because this one over here is going to round. Okay, and unless you know how to convert that rounded answer into fractions, then you're getting an approximation, which isn't good.
I figured out a little thing with the 9 easily. Yes,
Yeah.
on the Math Excel, I for some reason I was able to.
So anything that is repeating is
So yeah.
a ninth. So if you have 0.3 repeating, that's 3/9. If you have 0.8 repeating, that's 8/9. 0.7 repeating is 7/9. 0.6 repeating is 6/9, and then you can simplify.
That's interesting.
So if you see repeating, that's how you convert to decimal.